Alrighty, so what I did was I mocked this up on the table last time you saw. I just set it over here. And I squeezed everything together as tight as I could get it just to see how the seams were looking. And I actually cleaned up a couple of these boards on the edges back at the jointer because the table saw, whenever you cut it on that to square it up, the blade can kind of make it kind of a jagged. Sometimes it can kind of walk a little bit on you and whatnot. So I cleaned up two of these needed that. The other one was fine where the blade cut. So it just depends. The better table saw you have, the least likely that's going to happen. My table saw is kind of like a cheap contractor saw, so the fence on it's not great. And the overall saw is just not great for doing super fine woodworking. So I'm looking to get a new table saw in the future, but for right now, that's what I have. At any rate, it's not a big deal that I have a jointer. I can just clean up that edge. Before, what I would have to do is sand it by hand and try to get it as smooth as possible so that the joints were very good and no gaps or anything. So at any rate, we've got the joints are all good now. And then what I did was made sure everything was lined up and this, which face I wanted. This is going to be the top. So which face I wanted on the top. Honestly, the way this wood looked, it didn't really matter to me which face was facing up. This is also not a showpiece. It's going to be a desk, a work desk. So not a big deal. But the only two things to consider were like that one edge that I showed previously. It's on this one. That obviously needs to be on the bottom. So that was the only thing to consider. And there's another piece that had a slight issue that needed to consider, and it's going on the bottom as well. I think it's this piece. So that's the only thing to consider. And then what I did was I took my square, got everything lined up, squeezed together like it's going to be put together, and I had my square put on here just like this, and I went through and made marks where the biscuits are going to go every 7 inches, except this gap is 8 inches just because that's how it worked out. So they're about 7 inches apart, and it's imperative that these are lined up properly, and your ends are all lined up and everything. So now we're at the point where we can start cutting some biscuits, or cutting some holes for some biscuits. And this is a biscuit here. It'll go and fit in between connecting both boards together, and basically it does help strengthen the joint some. But the main thing that these are great at is aligning the boards, to the exact same height on the top. These did go through the planer, and I planed them to the exact or very close to the same thickness. But the biscuit actually helps tremendously with doing, the aligning that way. So the boards will be flat and flush, and also helps, the joint. So let's start cutting some holes. And one last thing I forgot to mention is I also label each edge. So like AA, BB, CC, and then the same thing on that side. Because it's imperative that these do not get like turned around or flipped around or switched in position or anything. They need to stay exactly like they are here when you go to glue it up. So I always do that just in case, because typically I'll do these obviously one at a time over there in just a second. But so it shouldn't get mixed up, but there's always a chance that it gets mixed up. So you just don't want that happening. So I always label them. That's just me though. That's it. It cuts a little slot. That's my biscuit joiner. It's a classic. I've had it for a while. I've used it many a times. I like it. The dust collection on it's pretty good. I mean, I don't even see a single shaving or anything. So it does do pretty good. So yeah, we just got to do that. So each end board, obviously, it's only gonna happen on one side, but the middle boards just got to happen on both sides. So it's gonna be quite a few more slots that we're gonna have to cut. And one thing to check before you start gluing up is sometimes there will be some wood fibers that stick out. See here? So you just want to pull that out, just so that doesn't like get caught in the gap and then hold off, the two boards from flush, being flush. So if there's any big pieces like that, just pull them out. But that should be about it. And then we will start, once I get this done really quick, it'll be time for gluing these together. right, and now you just wait a long time. Wait a while for it to dry completely. For this, I'm not going to touch this again until tomorrow, just to make sure it's got plenty of time. So the way I'm doing it, I'm not using any cauls, which are basically you could put a strip, something to clamp together this way if you wanted to, and that would make sure that it stays completely, absolutely perfectly flat. The way I'm doing it, and for what this is, it's not needed. These parallel clamps do pretty good at keeping it straight, plus all the edges were just jointed and all that perfectly, so this should remain pretty square and straight as is. The other thing too that I usually like to do is I like to wipe the glue off. Sort of depends on what you're gonna do, if you want to do that or not. For me, it's usually easier to deal with the glue this way, because this is going to need a lot of sanding anyways on this top portion, to make it nice and flat and smooth. And I mean, it's already pretty flat, but you know, we want to get the imperfections out with, you know, all the pencil marks, and it's not going to be exactly perfect anyways after doing this. It'll be pretty close, but you're going to want a lot of sanding regardless. Or if you have a $10,000 planer big enough to put this through, you could do that, but I do not. So I'll just be doing a lot of sanding. And to me, it's just easier to wipe the glue here and sand it off versus letting it dry and then trying to get it off with a chisel, because inevitably every time I use a chisel to try to get glue off, it's always going to leave deep gouges, or, you know, a scratch. You slip and there's a scratch in, and then you've got to sand it down anyways at that point. So the underside, yes, I will use the chisel because it's the underside. No one's ever going to see it. It doesn't matter. So if it gets a few scratches, who cares? It might get sanded a little bit, but you know, doesn't matter as much. Also, I put the paper down just to help sort of preserve my tabletop. It's already got a bunch of glue on it from previous glue ups, but you know, if I can help keep the glue from getting on it, that's good. And the parallel clamps were freshly waxed with paste wax. And while it doesn't keep the glue from sticking entirely, it will help. What else? I added a pipe clamp in the middle. This should be enough clamping for this. 36 inches. So this should be plenty of clamping for that. And yeah, now we just wait. For me, it's gonna be about a day. If you want to wait, if you're doing this yourself, you can wait a few hours. But I like to make sure I give it a full 24 hours before I start doing much to it. So at this point, we'll bring it back after it's dry. I wanted to mention one last thing about the cauls I was talking about that I forgot to mention. So the number of boards that you are joining together greatly influences whether you're going to need those or not. I've only got 3 joints here, and they're fairly wide boards, so this table didn't really need them. But if you're going to do, say, 7 or 8 boards, and they're all, you know, 3.5, 4 inches, you're almost certainly going to need something to squish them together so that they don't do this or this, you know, exaggerating, but they will do that if you've got a bunch of them. And like I said, the more of those you have, the greater the likelihood of that happening and it being worse. So it's each one of those joints makes it, you know, exponentially higher that you're going to need those. All right, it's been a few days, and I'm going to go ahead and I already took the one clamp off. And actually the day after, the morning after, I, you know, took the pressure off all the clamps because it wasn't needed. And then I took this clamp off, and now I'm just gonna, I left it on these other clamps for a few more days, and now I'm gonna take it off these clamps and see how it looks on the back side. Which there's gonna be a lot of glue that needs to be cleaned up on the bottom side, but again, that's the bottom, so it's not a huge deal. Yeah, it stuck a tiny bit to the clamps, but not bad. But just to be expected with that much glue. So let me go and get these moved. See, see all that glue that dripped. I didn't want all that on my table. I've done it before, and it's a mess. It's a lot easier to have this paper, which is cheap. And the mess is gone. All right. And there you see our glue lines, and all these black marks are just from the planer. So those will just come off pretty easily. I might be able to clean those off before I even sand, but now I see all the glue marks, which are gonna have to be, these are gonna have to be taken off with a chisel. Like I mentioned before, you can be very careful with the chisel to try to not gouge the wood, but it's, for me anyways, it's hit or miss. That's why I wiped the top so that it just gets sanded. That's just easier for me personally. So it will take some time to go through and do this. I'm not going to bore you with all that, but that's what you do, is you take your chisel and get all that glue off. This actually might need to be sharpened. Yeah, that chisel is kind of meh. All right, that got us good enough for this side, since this is going to be the bottom. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it's pretty close anyways. There's a couple spots like here and like on these corner or edges and this part that could be sanded a little more, but that was already 2 hours of sanding, and I don't feel like doing any more on this bottom side since, you know, like I said, this is the bottom. So now it's time to turn it and sand the other side. And this side shouldn't take as long, but it could still take a little while. So I am not going to do this. I'm not going to record doing this side. I'll just bring you back once I'm done. Nice and smooth. So now that I got the top, I sanded it down to 120. Now I'm going to go finer grit than that before I put a finish on this, but for now 120 is going to be good enough. I just wanted it cleaned up and flat so that I can go ahead and do everything else that I need to do with this. So the hard part is going to be getting the frame work that goes underneath it figured out, because of course the cabinet is going to go somewhere in here, and then I'm going to attach some boards to at least on one side to the cabinet, so that I can have a solid piece that's not particle board to attach to, and then I'm going to use L brackets to attach to the piece down here and to the top, so that'll be a pretty secure connection. And so basically, cabinet here, and then I need to have basically a square frame built out over here. And I was thinking of doing poplar at first, but I think I'm going to use oak actually, because this oak will just look a little bit nicer. and it'll just look better for this, because this is maple. And then possibly gonna do some walnut trim. I'm not 100% decided on that yet though. That's a maybe. I want to get this done and on the cabinet and in place before I decide on the trim. And of course, oh, I forgot the mahogany legs. So that's hardwoods, very hardwoods. And so those are going to be more, oak will be a lot more resilient than poplar, because poplar is technically a hardwood, but it's like very bottom end as far as hardness goes. So using the oak for the frame, it's just gonna be better all around. So, but what I want to do now is this cabinet. I want to do a test on the color. So this gray is just awful. I don't want this gray color. So I've got some white lacquer that I'm gonna spray on this side and in a spot and just see how it does. I'm not sure. I don't even know what this is. If it's just like a plastic coating, because I don't think it's paint. I think it's some kind of plastic coating. So I just want to see how the lacquer does, how well it sticks to this. I'm going to clean it up, this spot up with some acetone real quick, and then spray this on, and then come back tomorrow and just see how good it sticks. See how easy it is to scratch off, that sort of thing, because I really don't want this gray. I don't like this gray. I'd rather it be white, so I'll do that. And that's all I'm doing on this today. I'll bring you back tomorrow once I'm working on this some more.